My name is Rachel Chen, and I never intended to become the whistleblower who brought down one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious tech companies. But when your own father is the CEO perpetrating massive fraud, sometimes life forces your hand. I grew up in the affluent suburbs of Palo Alto, California, where success wasn't just expected, it was demanded. My father, James Chen, had built Quantum Dynamics from a garage startup into a $50 billion enterprise specializing in quantum computing technology. To the outside world, we were the perfect Asian American success story, immigrant parents who achieved the American dream through hard work and brilliant innovation. But perfection, as I learned, often conceals the deepest flaws. I was 26 when I first noticed the discrepancies. As the newly appointed director of financial operations at Quantum Dynamics, I had access to the company's most sensitive financial data. My father had insisted on my taking this position, despite my initial reluctance. "Family must stick together," he would say, his voice carrying that slight accent that became more pronounced when he was emotional. "Who else can we trust but our own blood?" The irony of those words still haunts me. My mother, Lisa, had passed away when I was 12, leaving my father to raise me alone. Perhaps that's why he became so obsessively protective, controlling every aspect of my life under the guise of parental care. The best schools, the right friends, the perfect career path, all carefully orchestrated by James Chen, the master conductor of our family's destiny. I excelled at everything, of course. Graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with dual degrees in computer science and business administration, earned my MBA from Harvard, and landed prestigious positions at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey before my father finally convinced me to join the family business. "Rachel," he'd said during one of our weekly dinners at his modernist mansion overlooking the bay, "it's time to come home." The numbers didn't add up. That was my first clue. Quantum Dynamics had reported breakthrough after breakthrough in quantum computing technology, driving our stock price to astronomical heights. But as I dug deeper into the financial statements, I discovered a web of shell companies, fake contracts, and inflated revenue figures that made Enron look like amateur hour. At first, I tried to convince myself I was mistaken. How could my father, the man who had lectured me endlessly about integrity and honor, be orchestrating such a massive fraud? But the evidence was undeniable. Quantum Dynamics' revolutionary quantum processor, the one that had garnered worldwide acclaim and billions in investment capital, didn't work as advertised. The test results had been fabricated, the demonstrations carefully staged. I confronted him one evening in his home office, that sleek space filled with awards and accolades that now felt like monuments to deception. "Dad, we need to talk about the Q3000 processor results." He barely looked up from his laptop. "What about them? They're fake." My voice trembled slightly. "The performance metrics, the stability tests, none of it is real." Finally, he raised his eyes to meet mine. I expected to see shame, perhaps even fear. Instead, I saw something closer to amusement. "Rachel, business is more complex than what they teach you in business school. Sometimes you have to accelerate the truth a little to achieve greater goals." Accelerate the truth? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, this is fraud. We're lying to our investors, our partners, everyone." He stood up then, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering San Francisco Bay. "Do you know why I named you Rachel?" he asked, seemingly changing the subject. "Your mother wanted to name you Catherine, after her grandmother. But I chose Rachel, because it means lamb in Hebrew. I wanted you to be pure, innocent." He turned to face me. "But innocence doesn't build empires, daughter, so you admit it? Everything's a lie?" "Not everything. The technology works in theory. We just need more time to perfect it. The investments, the contracts, they give us that time. Without them, we lose everything. Is that what you want? To destroy what I built for you?" I felt sick. "Built for me? I never asked for any of this." "No?" His voice took on an edge I'd never heard before. "The private schools, the tutors, the connections that got you into Stanford? The comfortable life you've always enjoyed? Where do you think all that came from?" "From hard work and innovation," I shot back. "At least that's what you always told me." Was that a lie too? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're still so naive, Rachel. The world doesn't reward honest failure. It rewards successful deception. Every major company has its secrets. We're just better at keeping ours. Until now, I said quietly. His expression hardened. What does that mean? It means I can't be part of this anymore. We need to come clean, do a full disclosure. Absolutely not. He cut me off with a sharp gesture. You will do nothing of the sort. I'm still your father, and I'm telling you to drop this immediately, or what? Or you'll discover that family loyalty only extends so far. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. I left his house that night with my mind made up. The next morning, I contacted the SEC with a comprehensive report detailing quantum dynamics' fraudulent practices. I included internal documents, email correspondence, and technical reports that proved beyond doubt that our quantum computing breakthrough was nothing but an elaborate hoax. The response was swift and devastating. Within hours, trading of quantum dynamics stock was suspended. Federal agents raided our corporate headquarters. My father was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury when he spotted me watching from across the parking lot. The media frenzy was intense. Tech titan's daughter exposes billion-dollar fraud, screamed the headlines. I became both hero and pariah overnight. Silicon Valley's elite closed ranks, treating me like a traitor who had betrayed not just her father, but the entire tech industry's unspoken code of silence. The death threats started arriving within days. Anonymous emails, phone calls, messages left on my car windshield. You'll pay for this, they promised. Nobody betrays family and gets away with it. I moved out of my luxury apartment into a modest condo in Oakland, changed my phone number, and started therapy to deal with the crushing anxiety and guilt. My father's words echoed in my head, innocence doesn't build empires. Perhaps not, but neither does fraud. The criminal trial lasted 6 months. I testified for 5 grueling days, laying bare every detail of the deception I had uncovered. My father sat at the defense table, never once looking in my direction. His defense team tried to paint me as a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge, but the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss. In the end, James Chen was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Quantum dynamics collapsed, taking with it thousands of jobs and billions in investor money. The ripple effects spread throughout the tech industry, leading to increased scrutiny of other companies' claims about breakthrough technologies. I received a letter from him about a month after the sentencing. Written on prison stationery, it contained just 3 lines. You chose truth over family. I hope it keeps you warm at night. You are no longer my daughter. I should have felt relieved that it was all over, but instead, I felt hollow. The truth had cost me not just my father, but my entire identity. Who was I now, if not James Chen's perfect daughter? The answer came gradually, as I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I started a consulting firm specializing in corporate ethics and compliance, using my experience to help other companies navigate the fine line between innovation and deception. I wrote a book about my experience, Breaking the Code of Silence, which became a bestseller and led to speaking engagements around the world. 3 years after my father's conviction, I received another letter from prison. This one was longer, more reflective. He wrote about his childhood in rural China, where his family had lived in poverty, how he had promised himself he would never be poor again, would do whatever it took to succeed, how that determination had gradually corrupted his moral compass. I built an empire of lies, he wrote, and lost the only thing that truly mattered, my daughter's respect. I'm sorry, Rachel, not for what I did, but for trying to make you complicit in it. You were stronger than I ever was. I read the letter several times before placing it in a drawer, unable to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to try to rebuild some kind of relationship. Another part knew that some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. My story became a case study in business ethics courses at top universities. Students would debate the morality of my choice. Was I right to expose my own father? Would silence have been a more forgivable sin than betrayal? I was invited to speak at Harvard Business School, my alma mater. Standing at the podium, looking out at those eager young faces, I thought carefully about what message I wanted to convey. The hardest choices in life, I told them, are not between right and wrong. Those are actually the easy ones. The hardest choices are between 2 wrongs. When every path forward requires sacrificing something valuable, in those moments, we must choose which values we hold most dear. A student raised her hand. Do you regret your decision? I paused, considering the question. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my father put me in that position. But I don't regret choosing truth over loyalty when the two came into conflict. Some prices are worth paying, even when they break your heart. 5 years after my father's conviction, I married David, a professor of ethics at Berkeley who had initially reached out to interview me for a book he was writing about corporate whistleblowers. We had a small ceremony in Marin County, with just close friends present. My father, still in prison, was not invited. We have a daughter now, named Lisa after my mother. Sometimes, when I look at her, I wonder what values she'll grow up to hold dear. Will she face the same impossible choices I did? Will she be strong enough to make them? I've started writing her letters, to be opened when she's older. They tell the story of her grandfather, both his achievements and his crimes. They explain why I did what I did, and what it cost me. Most importantly, they tell her that love, real love, should never require us to compromise our integrity. Last week, I received notice that my father is up for parole. His lawyer contacted me, asking if I would speak on his behalf at the hearing. Apparently, he's been a model prisoner, teaching business classes to other inmates and expressing genuine remorse for his actions. I haven't decided yet what I'll do. Part of me wants to believe in redemption, in the possibility of second chances. Another part remembers his words from that night in his office. Innocence doesn't build empires. Perhaps not, but integrity builds something far more valuable, a life you can be proud of. My father built his empire on lies, and watched it crumble under the weight of truth. I'm building something different, a legacy of honesty, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Sometimes at night, I stand at my daughter's crib and whisper promises to her sleeping form. I promise never to put her in the position I was in. I promise to teach her that love and truth should walk hand in hand, not in opposition. Most of all, I promise that she'll always know that doing the right thing, while rarely easy, is always worth the cost. The tech industry has changed since the quantum dynamics scandal. New regulations and oversight mechanisms have been put in place. Companies are more cautious about making grandiose claims about breakthrough technologies. Some say I helped usher in an era of greater transparency and accountability. But that was never my goal. I didn't set out to be a whistleblower or an agent of change. I simply reached a point where I could no longer live with the weight of knowing the truth and doing nothing about it. Sometimes, the most profound changes come not from grand plans, but from simple moments of choosing integrity over convenience. My father once told me that business is more complex than what they teach in business school. He was right about that, but not in the way he meant. The complexity lies not in finding new ways to deceive, but in maintaining your moral compass when the pressure to compromise is overwhelming. I still dream about that night in his office sometimes. In my dreams, the conversation goes differently. Sometimes he admits his wrongs and agrees to come clean. Sometimes I accept his justifications and become complicit in the fraud. Sometimes we just stand there in silence, father and daughter, watching our relationship crumble like a house of cards. But when I wake up, I'm always grateful for the choice I made. It cost me my father, my inheritance, and my place in Silicon Valley's elite circles. But it gave me something far more valuable, the ability to look in the mirror each morning and respect the person looking back. Last month, I was asked to give the commencement address at Stanford's business school. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of eager faces, I thought about what advice I could offer these future business leaders. Success is not measured by the empire you build, I told them. It's measured by the integrity you maintain while building it. Money comes and goes, stock prices rise and fall, but character, that's the one thing that, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. A young woman approached me after the speech, tears in her eyes. She told me she was facing a similar situation at her family's company, watching her uncle engage in questionable practices while everyone looked the other way. How did you find the courage? She asked. I thought about it for a moment before answering. Courage isn't about not being afraid, I said. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Sometimes the hardest person to stand up to is the one you love most. She hugged me then, a stranger finding solidarity in shared ethical struggles. It reminded me that my story, painful as it is, serves a purpose beyond my own journey. It shows others that they're not alone in facing these impossible choices. My father will be eligible for parole in 3 months. If he's released, he'll enter a world very different from the one he left. The tech industry has evolved. The old ways of doing business, the shortcuts, the deceptions, the fake it till you make it mentality, are increasingly under scrutiny. Part of his parole conditions, if granted, would include never working in an executive position again, never building another empire, never having the chance to blur the lines between innovation and fraud. I wonder sometimes if he's truly changed, or if he's just learned to play a different kind of game. Prison has a way of teaching patience, of making people appear reformed while leaving their core beliefs unchanged. But that's not my concern anymore. I've built my own life, my own legacy, based on different values than the ones he tried to instill in me. My consulting firm helps companies navigate ethical challenges without compromising their integrity. My book continues to inspire discussions about corporate responsibility and personal courage. Most importantly, my daughter will grow up knowing that her mother chose truth over expedience, integrity over empire. She'll understand that real strength lies not in the ability to deceive successfully, but in the courage to face truth unflinchingly. Yesterday, I received another letter from my father. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered, showing his age perhaps, or the toll of prison life. He wrote about watching the seasons change through his cell window, about the books he's read, the regrets he's accumulated. I was wrong, he wrote, not just about the fraud, but about everything. I thought I was teaching you strength, but you taught me what real strength looks like. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. I haven't decided yet whether to attend his parole hearing. Part of me wants to see him, to look in his eyes and try to gauge whether his remorse is genuine. Another part wants to leave the past firmly in the past, to focus on the future I'm building with my own family. But either way, I know I made the right choice that night in his office. Sometimes the hardest decisions are also the clearest ones, if we have the courage to see them through. My daughter is starting to talk now, forming her first words. Yesterday, she pointed at a picture of my father from before the scandal and said, "Who?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a child that her grandfather is both a brilliant innovator and a convicted fraudster? That her mother both loved him and brought him to justice? These are questions I'll have to answer eventually, but for now, I'm focused on teaching her simpler truths, that honesty matters, that integrity is worth protecting, that doing the right thing is more important than doing the profitable thing. The tech industry continues to evolve, with new companies pushing the boundaries of innovation every day. Sometimes I'm asked to consult with startups, to help them navigate the fine line between ambitious goals and ethical constraints. I always tell them the same thing: build something real, even if it takes longer. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. My father's words still echo in my mind sometimes. Innocence doesn't build empires. He was wrong about that, too. True innovation, the kind that changes the world for the better, comes from a place of authentic discovery and honest achievement. The empires worth building are those that can withstand scrutiny and stand the test of time. I've started teaching a course at Stanford on corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. Many of my students are surprised to learn that I don't see myself as a hero. I just reached a point, I tell them, where the cost of silence became greater than the cost of speaking out. Last week, I visited the new Quantum Computing Research Center at MIT. They're doing legitimate work there, making slow but steady progress toward the breakthroughs that quantum dynamics had falsely claimed. The lead researcher, Dr. Sarah Martinez, told me something that stuck with me: real innovation is messy, it's full of failures and setbacks. Anyone promising a smooth path to breakthrough technology is probably selling you a lie. The irony isn't lost on me. My father's fraud actually set quantum computing research back by years, diverting resources and attention from legitimate efforts. In trying to accelerate progress through deception, he ended up impeding it instead. David and I bought a house in Berkeley recently. It's modest compared to my father's former mansion, but it's honest, paid for with money we earned through legitimate work. Lisa loves the backyard, where we're growing a vegetable garden. There's something profound about watching things grow naturally, at their own pace. The parole hearing is next week. After much reflection, I've decided to attend, not to speak for or against his release, but to show him who I've become, a woman who no longer needs his approval or fears his disappointment. I'll bring pictures of Lisa, his granddaughter whom he's never met, not as an olive branch, but as proof that life continues, that new stories begin even as old ones end. My book is being adapted into a film. The producers want to dramatize the confrontation scene in my father's office, make it more explosive and dramatic. I told them the real version was dramatic enough, a quiet conversation that changed everything. Sometimes the most significant moments in life come not with a bang, but with the soft certainty of knowing you can't turn back. The tech industry's fake it till you make it culture is finally facing a reckoning. more whistleblowers have come forward, inspired perhaps by my story, exposing similar frauds at other companies. Each case reinforces what I learned, that truth, while costly, is ultimately less expensive than deception. Yesterday, I found an old family photo album. There was a picture of my father holding me as a baby, looking at me with such pride and hope. I wondered what that younger version of him would think of how things turned out. Would he understand the choices we both made? Would he recognize that in trying to protect me from the world's hardships, he ended up creating the greatest hardship of all? I've started a nonprofit organization called Ethics and Innovation, working to create safe channels for tech industry whistleblowers to report fraud without destroying their careers. We provide legal support, counseling, and career guidance. More importantly, we're building a community of people who chose truth over loyalty, integrity over success. The tech industry is changing, slowly but surely. New companies are embracing transparency, acknowledging failures as part of the innovation process rather than hiding them. Some say it's making progress slower, but I believe it's making it more real. Lisa started preschool this fall. During parent orientation, they asked each parent to share their hopes for their child, while others spoke about success, achievement, and happiness. I found myself saying something different. I hope she grows up to be brave enough to do the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The other parents looked at me strangely, but one mother came up to me afterward. She had read my book, she said, and it had helped her make a difficult decision at her own workplace. Your story gave me courage, she told me. It showed me that sometimes losing everything is the only way to save yourself. That's the paradox I've come to understand. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose it all to keep what matters most. My father lost everything trying to keep what he had built. I lost everything refusing to maintain his lies. But while his loss left him with nothing but regret, mine became the foundation for something new and better. My mother's picture sits on my desk at home. Sometimes I wonder what she would think of all this. Would she be proud of me for exposing the truth? Or would she have advised me to protect the family at all costs? I'll never know. But I like to think she would understand that in choosing truth over loyalty, I was being loyal to something even more important, the values she and my father had originally taught me, before ambition corrupted his vision. The parole hearing is tomorrow. I prepared what I'll say if asked to speak. Not about whether he should be released, that's for the parole board to decide, but about what I've learned from this whole experience. About how the hardest choices in life are often the ones that seem like they shouldn't be choices at all. David asked me last night if I'm ready to face him. Ready isn't the right word, I said, but I'm at peace with everything that's happened. That's even better than being ready. He held me for a long moment before saying, you know, when I first interviewed you for my book, I thought I was researching a story about corporate fraud. Instead, I found a story about courage, about the cost of integrity, about the complicated love between parents and children. That's why I fell in love with you, not because you made the right choice, but because you made it for the right reasons. Looking back now, I realize that my father was right about one thing: innocence doesn't build empires, but integrity can build something far more valuable, a life of purpose, a legacy of truth. A foundation strong enough to support not just success, but meaning. Tomorrow, when I face my father across the parole hearing room, I won't be the same person who stood in his office that night, trembling as I confronted him about his fraud. I'm stronger now, more certain of who I am and what I stand for. The cost of my choice was high, but the reward has been beyond measure, the ability to teach my daughter, through example rather than words, that character is worth any price. As I close this chapter of my story, I think about the legacy I'm creating for Lisa, not an empire built on deception, but a heritage of courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to truth. She may never face exactly the same choice I did, but she'll face her own moments of decision, her own tests of character. When those moments come, I hope she'll remember that her mother once stood at a similar crossroads and chose the harder path, not because it was easy, but because it was right, not because it promised success, but because it preserved something more valuable than any empire, the ability to look in the mirror and respect the person looking back. In the end, that's the only legacy worth passing on. The day of my father's parole hearing arrived with an unseasonably cool San Francisco morning. As I sat in the stark government building, waiting for the proceedings to begin, I thought about all the paths that had led us here. My father entered the room in his prison uniform, looking smaller than I remembered. Prison had aged him considerably, his hair was now completely gray, and deep lines etched his face. When our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something I'd never seen before in his expression: humility. The parole board asked standard questions about his rehabilitation, his plans for the future, his understanding of his crimes. He answered each one thoughtfully, without the artificial polish that had once characterized his public speaking. When asked about his greatest regret, he turned to look directly at me. "My greatest regret," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "is not the money lost or the years spent here. It's that I taught my daughter that success was more important than truth, that I tried to make her complicit in my crimes, that I forgot what really mattered." When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, aware of all eyes in the room. "My father taught me 2 sets of lessons in life," I began. "The first set was about ambition, success, and the importance of winning at any cost. The second set came later, through watching the consequences of his choices. These were harder lessons, but more valuable, about integrity, courage, and the true meaning of family." I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. "I'm not here to advocate for or against my father's release. That's the board's decision to make. I'm here because I want him to know that despite everything that's happened, I've finally understood something important. His greatest failure wasn't the fraud he committed at Quantum Dynamics. It was believing that love could exist without honesty, that family bonds could survive without trust." The board granted him parole, with strict conditions. As we left the hearing room, my father stopped me in the hallway. "Rachel," he said softly, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'd like to meet my granddaughter someday, if you'll allow it." I looked at him for a long moment. "We'll see," I replied. "Trust has to be rebuilt slowly. If you're serious about changing, about being honest, we can start with small steps. But Lisa will never know anything but the truth about who you are and what happened." He nodded, accepting this condition without argument. It was perhaps the first time in my memory that he'd accepted something without trying to negotiate better terms. Over the next year, we began a careful reconstruction of our relationship. It started with supervised visits, then occasional family dinners. My father, stripped of his empire and his pretenses, slowly revealed a different side of himself. He spoke openly about his mistakes, about the pressure that had driven him to cross ethical lines, about the self-deception that had allowed him to justify his actions. Lisa, now 4, took to him cautiously at first, then with growing affection. She called him Grandpa James and delighted in his stories about growing up in China, stories I'd rarely heard myself, as he'd always been too focused on the future to discuss the past. My nonprofit organization continued to grow, eventually establishing offices in New York, London, and Singapore. We worked with companies to develop ethical guidelines for technological innovation, creating frameworks that balanced progress with integrity. The quantum dynamics effect, as it became known in business schools, served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing appearance over reality. David and I had another child, a son we named William. My father, now living in a modest apartment in San Jose, became a regular presence in our lives. He helped Lisa with her math homework and taught William Chinese characters, finding joy in these simple interactions that had once seemed beneath his notice. One evening, as we sat in our garden watching the children play, my father turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I spent my life building something I thought would last," he said, "but what you've built, this family, your organization, your reputation for integrity, that's the real legacy. You succeeded where I failed, not despite choosing truth over deception, but because of it." I reached over and squeezed his hand, feeling the years of anger and hurt finally begin to fade. "We all have to choose our own path," I told him. "I chose mine. Now I'm teaching my children to choose theirs." The tech industry has changed significantly in the decades since the quantum dynamics scandal. New regulations and ethical guidelines, many of them influenced by our organization's work, have made it harder for companies to engage in the kind of systematic deception my father once practiced. More importantly, there's been a cultural shift, a growing recognition that true innovation doesn't need to hide behind false claims and manipulated data. I still speak at business schools and technology conferences, sharing my story not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that every person faces moments of choice between what's easy and what's right. My father sometimes joins me now, adding his perspective on how the pursuit of success at any cost can blind us to the things that truly matter. Lisa is 10 now, old enough to understand more about her family's history. Recently, she asked me if I ever regretted my decision to expose the fraud. I thought carefully before answering. "No," I told her. "It was painful, and it cost us a lot, but it also gave us something valuable, the chance to build relationships based on truth rather than deception. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the best outcomes, even if we can't see it at the time." She nodded, processing this with the seriousness that sometimes surprises me in her. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said simply. before running off to play with her brother. Last week, my father moved into a retirement community near our home. As we helped him settle in, I found him looking at an old photograph of Quantum Dynamics headquarters. "I used to think that building was my greatest achievement," he said. "Now I know my greatest achievement is having a daughter who was strong enough to stand up to me when I was wrong." The story of quantum dynamics and its downfall is still taught in business schools, but now it's paired with the story of what came after, how truth, though costly, can lead to redemption, how families can heal even after the deepest betrayals, how integrity can build something more lasting than any corporate empire. As I write these final words, I think about the legacy I'm leaving for my children, not one of wealth or power, but of courage and truth. They will grow up knowing that their mother faced a difficult choice and chose integrity over expedience, truth over loyalty to a lie. More importantly, they'll grow up knowing that their grandfather, though he made grave mistakes, found the courage to acknowledge them and work to make amends. In the end, that's the most valuable inheritance we can pass on, not money or success, but the understanding that it's never too late to choose truth, to rebuild what's broken, to create something authentic and lasting from the ashes of deception. My father and I still have our differences, our moments of tension and disagreement, but now they're honest disagreements, unburdened by the weight of lies and manipulation. We've built something new together, not an empire of deception, but a family founded on truth. And that, I've finally learned, is the greatest success of all.